Okay, hello and welcome to the Sprint35 review. The sprint lasted a standard 3 weeks, unlike the previous sprint, which was 4 weeks. Next slide, please. So I'll go over the sprint statistics. Greg Blomquist will tell us what's new in provider land. Greg Tanzillo will tell us what's up with the core and the appliance. Alberto will fill us in on the REST API. Dan will tell us about the UI. Greg M will tell us about Automate and ongoing or starting work on Ansible integration. And Rich will give us a summary of where we are on the SmartState. Next slide, please. All right, so this sprint, we had 231 pull requests merged on the ManageIQ repo. 92 were bugs, 56 were enhancements, and a lot more was there in refactoring and tech debt. So it's a pretty good mix. Seems like, 56, so about a quarter enhancements, about a little over a third in bug fixes, and the rest sprinkled around. Good looking sprint. Next slide, please. On the breakdown, more than half, 123 of those pull requests were in the UI. We sometimes double count, by the way, the pull requests. So something could be labeled as UI and providers because there's some back-end work and some UI work. So it's not just purely UI there. So 123 PRs that had the UI label, 54 that had the providers label, 22 were other, and the green thing there is the core 28. So those are the highlights there. In terms of providers, the vast majority were in the container world, and the rest were just a generous sprinkling in each area. Next slide, please. Yep, on the Ruby gem dependencies, we use Gymnasium. We have 70 yellows, so it's slowly climbing. I think we were at 50 or so several sprints ago. So what that means is that there's new Ruby gems out there being updated that we're using, consuming, and we're slowly falling behind. We have to make an effort to start getting us up to the latest on many of the Ruby gems that we use. Next slide, please. In terms of other repositories that we worked on, as you can see, the top one there is Ansible, the Ansible Tower client that we developed, with 5 pull requests merged there. And then the Azure armrest with our ongoing Azure work, a few in the appliance, a few in docs, guides. So, while ManageIQ is the main repo that we all kind of work on, there's other repos that are in the works. Next slide, please. You're presenting. Okay, I'll turn it over to Greg B for on providers. Are you there, Greg? Okay. Let's skip over to a few slides forward to the next person. Yep.
I'm sorry, could you guys not hear me?
No.
Now I can hear you.
All right, back to provider.
I swear I can do this. I've done it before.
You can do it.
So there's a few highlights to point out for providers. For OpenStack, there were a couple PRs to clean up our SSL support. There was some residual code left behind that needed to be cleaned up, dealing with how we handled selecting SSL versus non-SSL. We also made the VM operations more consistent between the VM list page and summary pages. For Microsoft System Center, we added the ability to delete VMs, which opens the door to adding retirement support, a feature that's on the roadmap. On the container side, I just wanted to point out that, again, this sprint, there were a ton of PRs that came in. Most were UI changes, so I'm going to let Dan cover those during UI. But we're still seeing a consistent flow from the container integration team. It's really great. Next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Adam who's going to show off a demo for the progress on the Google Cloud Engine provider. So, Adam?
All right. So I just dropped out and reconnected, so hopefully this stays up the entire time. So I'm going to be showing off the collaboration with Google on adding Google Cloud platform support. So this is adding the GCE compute engine. Here we have the different regions that we support. And we'll go over to the console to get the project ID. And we'll add that. And for authentication, Google uses key pairs and a JSON object, so we'll go ahead and create one of those credentials. The number they support, service accounts, are generally used for server-to-server communication, so that's going to be the default. And we will copy and paste that over into the password field here and validate it. And go ahead and add the provider.
What's happening at this point?
So right now it's doing an inventory refresh, and we'll go over and while it's completing, go and take a look at the instances that we have that we'll see later. And take a look at some of the images that you can deploy from. They have most of the normal operating system types. And take a look at a specific instance.
This is the view from the Google console here.
Yes.
And now we're going to see the same thing on our side?
Mm-hmm. And so the inventory refresh should be completing shortly. It's just the more specific information about one of the instances we're going to take a look at. And the refresh just completed, so go through and take a look at the availability zones.
260 images, 10 instances, cool.
And you can see it links up with what instances are in which zone. And we can see the different flavors. This is very similar to Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And now we'll look at the instances. And so if we drill down into this RHEL machine, the information about the hardware, drill down into which template it was provisioned from.
Cool.
And we can drill down to the availability zone, see the other instances that are there.
Mm-hmm.
And now if we go back, we'll see this is the only powered off one, so let's go and power it on. This always takes a little longer than I think it should, but if we go over here, we'll see that it's starting up. And now that it's running, we can go back over here and refresh this instance and see that the power state is on now.
Awesome.
Nice.
Very cool. Okay. Thanks for that demo, Adam. Awesome work. Marianne, back to you. So next slide. All right, so we're done with the provider update. Greg T, over to you.
Okay. So on the core team, aside from the typical bug fixes and cleanup and things that we do during a sprint, there's a couple of fairly big initiatives that we're working on, so I wanted to share those with you. So we're looking for, we're researching a replacement for Ruby Rep, which is what we use for our replication. So people familiar with that probably are aware of the challenges that Ruby Rep provides. First of all, it's not actively being maintained. It's a Ruby gem. We actually adopted it several years ago, and we're the only ones who've made any changes to it, just out of necessity. It's implemented in Ruby, and you just use SQL. So we're looking for something that's that would be more performant and maybe work at a slightly lower level. Relies on an external process and SQL triggers, which can be slow as well, hard to control. And I guess the biggest thing is that the performance suffers on slow networks. And if you combine that with lots of data churn, then you can easily get behind with replication. Next slide, please. So we're doing research on BDR, bidirectional replication, and Nick is leading that research, so I'm going to let him talk about that.
Yeah. So as one of the technologies we were investigating for this, BDR came up in one of the searches as what's going to be an extension to Postgres itself. It also allows us to run as a master-master appliance, so we can replicate as, instead of having one master region, we can replicate between all of our environments, allowing us to see all of our data from each appliance. It is currently being developed by Postgres contributors, so they're rather in the process of putting all of their needed additions into Postgres core, and then it'll be delivered as an extension. And we're working in a proof of concept right now. Currently, I have the app running on top of their patched Postgres binaries, which was a bit of a task to get into a build. And we can see provider refresh going in both directions in a multi-region setup. And the next task is the performance testing. So we want to prove beyond a doubt that it's quite a bit better than Ruby Rep. We have a link there for the docs if anyone's interested in checking out the project. Next slide. So, like I said, there's a few things that we want to get out of BDR, or hope that we can get out of BDR, all of which are on the roadmap. So better performance, as I mentioned, and then also high availability. So we have the option of clustering many databases and using that as a high availability solution. And then also administration from any region. So coupled with some changes in queuing, we could use this to administer any provider or any region's data from any individual ManageIQ installation. So we're pushing towards that now, but also looking at other things that this technology could do for us. And that's it. Awesome. Next slide.
Cool. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much. Looks like a very promising effort.
Yeah, seems so. Yeah, we have to vet all these things out, and so the work for this is going to be ongoing. So we could probably update that in the next sprint demo. Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that was done is changing the way workers are launched. So I'm going to let Joe Raffanello speak to that since he did all the work for it.
Okay, so with when we upgraded to Ruby 2.0, one of the advantages of Ruby 2.0 was it became copy and write friendly. So I started looking at being able to implement our workers to, instead of starting a new process, running through the exact same startup code in each worker, to be able to fork. So being able to implement that, we initially see much faster startup, so workers start in faster. We're starting to see the ability to take advantage of the shared memory, write as soon as copy as soon as it's written to, and we're able to start to see some benefits in terms of memory usage. But currently, it's roughly a little bit more memory usage, but we're looking to improve that. In addition, we added a package to the appliance called SMEM, which provides us better ability to see how much memory is actually being used by each process. tools like top use resident memory, which doesn't report shared memory precisely. So the future, we're looking to improve the actual shared memory that launched in the parent process before week 4. So hopefully that will be the goal. We'll be able to drop memory usage for workers. That's still ongoing.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe, is there any measurement on you said it starts workers faster?
Yeah, on my test environments, from the moment we start workers to when they're actually able to do work, or all of them are launched, it was 45 seconds to 15.
To what?
To 15.
So a 3-fold increase.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
But it really depends on if you're running SSD drives versus, it's all I/O.
Yeah.
That we're avoiding.
Gotcha.
Great. Okay, next slide. I'll turn it over to Alberto to talk about the REST API.
Where you got to get close. You got to either sit down or get close to a mic or something.
So for this sprint, we had a couple of enhancements that came in. One was Tim has been working on the enhancing the APIs here. We are now exposing instances as a primary collection because we had a request that came in to be able to terminate them. So the next bullet here was exposing the new terminate action for instances. So that's already been used by folks. Next slide, please. Okay, another enhancement that's embedded was the ability to filter categories by name. But the problem was name was a virtual attribute, so it was implemented in a generic way. So even though that was the goal, but it can work for any of the collections and resources. All right, the next item here, Martin H has been doing some enhancements, so we needed to expose the preferred language to the consumer here, in this case, the SSUI. So in the main entry point, there's a new hash for settings, and we're returning that information as a locale. So that was that. Off to the next slide, please. Okay, and in this sprint, we added support for dynamic dialogues. That was an ask for the SSUI. So we've been working with Eric Sees. He's done some changes on the back end to support that. So we're exposing the capability with the new action refresh dialog fields. In this examples, as a dialog is getting filled, in this case, it's a service template of a particular catalog. You can query, for example, here, you give it with the dialog fields, the currently filled in field, and which field you're interested in, and it will return that, so to keep that flow going. So that was a big enhancement here. So, and I think that's it. Off to the next slide.
All right, over to Dan.
All right, guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, I was having problems at the beginning, so. Okay, so on the user interface side, as Oleg mentioned, there were 123 PRs, and you can see how they broke out, mostly bugs, but we did quite a bit of enhancements and refactoring as well. Some of the new functionality put into the core of the UI, so there was some IE10N work, some image work as well, trying to get over to font icons, and also some more work on the Bootstrap switch. We implemented a few more of those. The containers team, as Greg B mentioned, they have been, barreling along here. So some of the major enhancements that they made, there's some new network trend charts. They introduced a new variables table for the environment variables, and I'll show you that. They've been continuously trying to get topology, better shape, and so there's some updates to that. One of them is they've added search functionality. And also some minor things have been added. I think there were having problems when there was no data, showing some cards that show that there is no data, and then they've added a refresh option in configuration as well to be able to refresh containers. Next slide. So in the UI, in the IE10N side of it, there's currently a developer setting that you can make to actually mark translated strings. It's hard to see it probably because it's not zoomed in very well, but we actually put the little chevrons around anything that's been translated, so you can actually tell things that are missing translation. They're not running through our translation code. So that helps in development and identifying the pieces that are not being done. Next slide. So here's some of the toolbars getting converted to font icons, so you can see the before and the after. Starting to use a standard set of pattern fly icons, as well as when there is no icon that represents what we need, we have our own custom set as well that's mixed in, but they're all using font icons. That gets us away from the individual image files. Next slide. And here's just another example. You'll see these in the list views as well. So anywhere you're seeing icons now, you should start seeing the font icon versions of them. Next. Okay, Bootstrap switches there on the left. You can see the old checkboxes, and now we're getting into more graphical types of settings. So those should be, actually I think we put like 5 or 6, maybe 7 places we've swapped those in. Next. So there on the bottom, you see the network trend charts that have been added to the containers dashboard. There is work going forward in the next few sprints where we're going to be trying to merge some of the existing CloudForms dashboard elements with the ones that the containers group have been using, and picking up the best of both worlds, where we get the better images and we get the dynamic dialogues from the existing CloudForms stuff. So watch for that in the future. Next. So this one is a GIF file running, and you can see that basically when there's a cell that has a lot of data, they've set it up so you can see one line of it, the top line of it, but then you can do a pull down and actually see the rest and then scroll through it. So we'll start using this probably in other places where we need to show more data than can fit. Normally, I think right now when we have a lot of data, we either truncate it or we show the whole thing and you end up having to scroll through a bunch of stuff. So this is a really nice control. Next. And there was a short demo, but a short video, but I didn't want to squeeze it in here. But basically, you can now type in to a search box and filter out the elements out on the topology, the nodes out on the topology map, and actually filter down and see the ones that match a certain name. I think this is like a first shot at it. You have to exactly match the name, but they're looking at actually doing wildcard search. Basically if it contains any part of it. So if I had a bunch of nodes out there that had my name in them, Dan, and then I could type in Dan and it would filter down to just those nodes. I think that's it. Next slide. Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. So for people using the self-service UI, all the service catalogs were always visible, but any of those catalogs that used dynamic fields that got their values from Automate, those weren't initially supported. So the previous UI, it's hard to see here a little bit, but would have a link directing you to go to the operations UI to then order that service. So if you go to the next slide, please. So in this release, it's not a compelling UI, but basically shows now the services are able to display those. This one just happened to have a dialogue around, had a refresh button on it, which is the manual effort, but there's also logic in there that does the triggering and auto refresh is supported there as well. So now any of the service catalogs that you can order from the operations UI are also available within the self-service UI now. And that was a big effort from Eric Clarizio with Alberto helping him on the REST side. Good to get that in. Next slide, please. And then for Automate on the simulate side, basically running a state machine, you can hit retry logic, and there's a lot of data kind of captured about the state of that if you're trying to run it through simulate, it was not easy to do. And this is something we hit internally and felt would help others as well. So basically now when you run a state machine that hits a retry, there's a retry button available that basically will just reinitiate it with the values that we capture and would normally do in a process. Down here, we just have a small sample script that Madhu had put together that the first time through, it hits a retry, sets a value, so the second time you come through, it basically says that it doesn't need a retry, and the next slide will show kind of what it would look like when you run through that. So at the bottom is the first, I've run it once, and the retry button appears in between the submit and reset. And then if I run that, just hit retry there again. The second pass through that method then sets retry to OK, and the button disappears. So extremely useful for people testing out state machines. That retry is a very common state that we run into. So that'll be useful. Next slide. So from Automate, we've always supported, sorry if that's hard to read, but supported being able to do queries, finds against the different classes that we expose through Automate. The common ones are dynamic finders where you do find by name or find by name and something else, which Rails is moving away from, more towards the where logic. So we are now supporting the where command, passing a hash that will then do the lookup. As we're kind of going through this, I realized, we didn't make any changes for this, but find by and find by bang are also supported the way the methods are written today. For people that aren't familiar with them, the big thing, where will always return an array. So a lot of times you do dot first and you only want the first element. Find and find by will return, a single item, usually generally more common if you're just getting one element back. And so the note in here is in a Rails or like Rails console environment, when you do something like where, you'll get a relation object back that you can then chain together with other where commands and pass those objects around and build stuff up. But Automate ends up evaluating those and turning it into an array. So that really isn't supported at the Automate level at this point. So the example in there is just showing kind of in console, you could, piece those together and create, a valid query, but that would fail if you run the same thing from the Automate side. So just so people are aware that that's not supported. Next slide. And then just some more additional work on the switchboard with OpenStack. We found a number of events that these actually were all present but not wired to policy events. So we've got those all passing through to policy. And then the retirement one is kind of an anti-enhancement, and we removed code, which I think is actually an enhancement in this case. So there was old logic in place that we would protect VMs that we didn't create or a user didn't specifically specify. They wanted to be completely removed from the provider as part of the retirement step. People were running into this. It was becoming an issue, and this is logic people can implement themselves. But we removed this check where we look for a tag that, honestly, we didn't even ship. They had to add themselves to be able to tag VMs, or the logic that was the VM provisioned by us. So we've removed that logic, and the flow is what people would expect out of the box. Is if you asked for the VM to be deleted from the provider, we'll do it all the time now instead of having these conditional checks in place that could, cause confusing results at the end of retirement. So we got that cleaned up as well.
Cool.
And next slide is Ansible, and I think Brendan's going to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, no demo?
Not yet.
All right.
We're adding Ansible Power as a provider, configuration management. This sprint we added modeling for the provider, the configuration manager, and configured systems. They're all subclasses of existing models. We added some connection logic. We also support a refresh of configured systems. So you can pull back all of the hosts that are listed in Tower. We wrote an API wrapper gem called Ansible Tower Client. It helps with credential validation, action logic. It supports a few resources like hosts, job templates, ad hoc commands, and there's a few more things being added to it. And currently we're working on pulling back inventories and groups and putting them somewhere in our modeling. And also there's some UI research being done. How to fit that in with the other configuration manager for me.
Can you do a little high level of all this work that you've done? What does it enable? What can people do with it?
Right now,
Even developers, like what?
you can manually add a provider to our Rails console. You just need the connection information.
And you can do a refresh.
Then you can refresh that provider, and it'll pull back all the configured systems.
Okay, so the next step is to expose all that in the UI.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Next slide, and over to Rich.
Okay. This sprint, we added support for SmartState analysis for SEVMM providers. Jerry's been working on that. In the initial release, we support virtual hard disks running on or residing on Hyper-V servers. We support both VHD and the newer VHDX disk formats. We support snapshotted disks, and of course we support the same file system stacks as our existing SmartState implementations for all the providers. Outstanding work. There's some issues with accessing disks routed from network data stores, which is due to some multi-hop authentication issues, and it can really benefit from some performance improvements. Next slide, please. Jerry's been working on this, and he has a demo to share with us.
Yep. And just need to share my screen.
Yeah.
You need to share your screen.
I need to share my screen.
You have to share your own screen. Otherwise, it's taking that shit.
There we go.
Take that, the window.
Okay. So we're going to run through a quick comparatively demo. I'm going to drill down into the SVMM provider and then get down to the Hyper-V hosts, pick a host that's got 28 VMs on it, and we're going to pick this one VM to start SmartState analysis. You can see that there's no data in this at this point, just no configuration files or users or groups or anything like that. We're going to start SmartState analysis on it, go to the task data, and refresh a bunch of times. We'll see it going through the various phases, waiting to start, process initiated, we're waiting for policy. Next thing should be the snapshotting. We're going to we run out and do a checkpoint VM command on the Hyper-V server to do that. And then we start scanning the metadata. And all this time it's talking specifically to the Hyper-V server. We never really communicate with the SEVMM server at all. Scanning the VM config here. Next we will be looking at the software. It goes through services, I believe, is next. And one more step. System. Then finally, we will go to the synchronization complete step. It says it's synchronizing the data, and then it will say it is complete. Take a look at what we've got. So we've completed successfully. This took about 40 minutes to run.
40? 40?
Yeah. And you see, well, we've got services, drivers, file system drivers, the users and groups and patches. We've got all listed in here. We didn't drill down. We've seen most of this before, but
No applications, or we're just not collecting those or something?
No, I didn't see that here. I'm not sure if that's a issue with the VM itself or if that's an actual issue with the. So I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
That's it.
So I guess probably a question on behalf of everyone. So the 40 minutes, what's the high-level kind of reason for the slowness?
A lot of this is network throughput. I have yet to test this in some place where we're not going across the land from Mawa down to Raleigh. I've been trying to get a VM down in Raleigh in order to test something that was a lot more local. I spoke to this a sysadmin that works for Dave Johnson, who's setting something up for me that as of 2 days ago, he's going to set something up. I have to double check with him and see if there, then I'd like to test there to see if it improves a bit, because we're not going so far through the
But how are we getting the actual bits? We're just getting them over the wire in some inefficient protocol? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, we're using WinRAM, just copy data back. And it's so
And
basically
encoding of the data and decoding of the data?
yeah, every request is using WinRM, so we're basically, you know, opening up a command window, which is opening up a PowerShell process, and every time we read data, we're opening the file, creating a buffer, seeking to the right spot, reading the data, encoding the data, base 64, and then copying the data back and closing the file as well. And we repeatedly do that. Some improvements with WinRM, actually there's a PR that was merged this morning. It helps us in that it doesn't have to create a new command process every time, but it's still creating a PowerShell process every time. And speaking to the gem owner, there's work going forward with the PowerShell remoting protocol to enable us to not have to create a PowerShell process every time. It also allow us to keep the environment there, so we won't have to open and close the file every time.
Gotcha.
So that will help.
Okay.
We're also going to be looking at some of the NTFS file system work that was done way in the past to see if we can have any improvements there, because it seems like processing the registry on Windows boxes specifically is a lot slower than something for when we process Linux box time.
Gotcha.
Right, that's it. Excellent.
Next slide.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, thanks, Rich and Jerry. Yeah, so those are the highlights of the work done in the sprint. Certainly was a chock full of new and interesting things. One item that we're working on is we're working on coming up with a ManageIQ Summit this spring. So look for the announcement over the coming weeks here as we finalize that and send out the message to everybody. But it'll hopefully be coming shortly. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone and open it up for questions and comments. All right, quiet. Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all in 3 weeks.
Bye.